18th-century Paris often appears in history as a pristine capital of art and philosophy. This was the city of the Enlightenment, where thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau debated the future of society within the quiet luxury of private salons. But the demographic reality was far more volatile. 600,000 residents were compressed into a tiny medieval footprint, turning the city into a high-pressure environment where every square inch of space was contested. The physical geography of Paris acted as a catalyst for the coming explosion. The city's layout forced a direct, daily collision between the winners and losers of the French social order. This 1765 map of Paris shows a chaotic maze of development. It reveals a landscape where extreme luxury and crushing poverty occupied the same narrow streets, with no buffer between them. Because the city was so compact, the social hierarchy was impossible to ignore. Aristocrats and starving commoners were forced into an intimate, toxic proximity that made the inequality of France visible at every street corner. The Ile de la Cité, the medieval birthplace of Paris, sat at the center of this friction. In the 1700s, this island was a web of heavily segmented, claustrophobic districts. Notre Dame Cathedral stood as the spiritual heart of the city, but it was literally choked by slums. Dark, decaying buildings were constructed right up to its stone walls, surrounding the cathedral with narrow, lightless alleys. These streets were perpetually covered in horse manure and human waste. Without a modern drainage system, open sewers ran past front doors, creating an environment defined by physical filth and a permanent, overwhelming stench. The Seine River offered a brief visual reprieve, at least for the nobility. The wealthy built grand palaces along the banks, featuring pristine private docks that allowed them to bypass the muddy streets entirely. However, the river water itself was a toxic flow of industrial waste and raw sewage. Upstream tanneries and slaughterhouses dumped debris directly into the current, turning the city's main artery into a swirling sludge of pollution. The spatial divide here was lethal. While the elite used the river for scenic views and private transport, the poorest Parisians were forced to draw their daily drinking water from this exact same contaminated source. Moving into the neighborhoods, the Hôtel de Soissons represented the height of elite urban design. Its grounds featured elegant geometric gardens that occupied prime real estate in the city's core. This palace functioned as a walled oasis. Its design was intended to isolate the nobility, creating a private sanctuary of high Renaissance style that stood in total opposition to the crowded district outside. The reality immediately beyond those palace walls was visceral. The neighborhood was dominated by Les Halles, the central food market that had supplied Paris since the 12th century. Les Halles was a sensory nightmare of rotting vegetables, fish guts, and animal blood. This vintage image shows the dense, muddy chaos of the market, where laborers worked in conditions of extreme squalor, just inches away from the quiet palace gardens. Elites further detached themselves by retreating to the temple enclosure. This was a walled, semi-autonomous zone within Paris, where the nobility enjoyed special legal status and exemptions from the taxes that burdened the poor. The upper classes managed the filth of Paris by building literal and legal walls to separate their lives from the masses. Every day, the citizens of Paris walked past these barriers, seeing exactly what they were being excluded from. Eventually, the monarchy chose the ultimate form of geographic isolation. King Louis XIV moved the entire French court and government out of Paris, relocating to a hunting lodge 12 miles away. The new Palace of Versailles was built on a staggering scale. This comparison shows how the sprawling palace grounds, with over 700 rooms, physically dwarfed the cramped neighborhoods the king had left behind. To fund this geographic retreat, vast amounts of tax revenue were pulled out of Paris. The money was funneled into geometric gardens and elaborate fountains, while the city's infrastructure remained in a state of medieval decay. This created a devastating disconnect. The king lived in absolute physical detachment, shielded from the sight of the poverty and hunger that his own extravagant spending was helping to fuel. This physical abandonment proved to be a fatal strategic error. By escaping the squalor of the capital, the royals lost their last remaining connection to the physical reality of their subjects. By July 1789, the urban pressure reached its limit. As royal spending drained the treasury, a series of poor harvests caused bread prices in Paris to spike, as shown by this explosive upward trend. With the king isolated 12 miles away in Versailles, the starving population turned their anger toward the physical symbols of authority in their streets. On July 13th, crowds stormed the prison Saint-Lazare. They weren't looking for political discourse. They were searching for grain and wine rumored to be hoarded behind the thick stone walls. The next day, the violence focused on the Bastille. This towering fortress in eastern Paris was the ultimate physical structure of royal tyranny, a medieval shadow that loomed over the working-class neighborhoods. After a bloody 4-hour battle, the people seized the fortress. They then spent months physically dismantling it by hand, stone by stone, until the symbol of the king's power was erased from the city map. The same fate met many of the aristocratic palaces that had once lined the Seine. The public systematically reclaimed these spaces, tearing down walls that once kept them in the mud. The revolution turned abstract concepts of liberty and equality into a physical struggle for the city itself. Living in the shadow of palaces, while starving in the streets, transformed political theory into a demand for total demolition. The very layout of Paris provided the targets for the people's rage.